Yo, how's it going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Now, recently, I've been feeling like the MMA world and the MMA space has been feeling a little bit bland right now because they keep on feeding us some of these Apex cards that nobody seems to want. But I feel like there's a lot of movement going on in the background of things, right? As we gear up for UFC 300, post UFC 300, I feel like we're probably going to receive some news that nobody expected. I feel like right now, currently, there is a lot of movement going on in different divisions, notably the middleweight division, because as we know, there's some fights that were announced, right? And there's some rumors going around about another potential huge fight in the middleweight division. And I just can't help myself to notice and to understand the fact that the UFC are gearing us up towards potentially one of the biggest fights in middleweight history. And let's just be honest, probably one of the biggest fights in UFC history, period. Now, just think about it, ladies and gentlemen. We are getting word that Israel Adesanya right now could potentially face off against Dricus du Plessis. Now, in my opinion, I don't feel like Israel Adesanya deserves to get that title shot, but that's a different topic for a different video. Let's just look at the sheer numbers that we're probably going to see if Israel Adesanya takes on Dricus du Plessis. Now, that fight is a big fight in and of itself. If Israel Adesanya becomes victorious in that fight, he's going to go ahead and defend his belt against likely the winner of Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. Now, let me just be honest. Both of those guys are big fighters. They both have big names. They both have big reputations with a big fan base. But if I'm just being completely honest, the fighter that, in my opinion, has the bigger fan base of the two is obviously Khamzat Chimaev. Now, this is just a theory, but I feel like most people would actually agree that if we see Khamzat Chimaev beat Robert Whittaker, we are without a doubt going to see one of the biggest middleweight fights of all time, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of numbers, obviously. Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya. I mean, right now, currently, I think a lot of people, most people would agree that Khamzat Chimaev has one of the biggest meat-riding fan bases out there. And of course, we know that Israel Adesanya has a whole freaking country behind him. I think that if we see Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya, without a doubt, it will probably be the biggest middleweight fight of history in the UFC. Without a doubt, I'm signing it here, ladies and gentlemen. Personally, I would love to see this fight. I would love to see Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya. I think that would be a great matchup because, like I said earlier in this video, the UFC space, the whole MMA world right now currently seems a little bland. But like I said, a lot of that has to do with UFC 300. So I feel like the UFC is doing the right thing at, potentially giving us one of the biggest fights in UFC history. And I feel like maybe that has the possibility of actually going down. But I feel like right now, the big question that we need to answer is whether or not Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya has a realistic possibility of it actually happening. Now, currently, right now, I do feel like Israel Adesanya does have what it takes to beat someone like Dricus du Plessis, given the fact that their striking is completely different. I feel like Israel Adesanya's striking is a lot more polished. I know what you guys are saying right now. Well, we saw Sean Strickland beat up Israel Adesanya for 5 straight rounds. You guys got to realize that Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland have completely different systems, and the way they approach the fight is just different. And honestly, I feel like Israel Adesanya right now, with his system that's very, very twitchy, he likes to mix in a lot of feints, control the distance. I feel like that's enough to beat someone like Dricus du Plessis, who has a very aggro style. If Dricus du Plessis is able to mix in some wrestling or some grappling, obviously that makes the fight a little bit more interesting, and it would probably turn the fight into his favor, definitely. But if I'm just being completely honest, I don't see that happening at all. And I feel like Dricus du Plessis' best chance at beating someone like Israel Adesanya is to probably strike with him, and I feel like Israel Adesanya beats him in the striking. Now, if Dricus du Plessis does want a chance and a real opportunity to beat Israel Adesanya, he needs to film study the crap out of Sean Strickland versus Israel Adesanya, if I'm just being completely honest. But maybe now Israel has patched up some of those things that he saw against Sean Strickland. And yeah, who knows? Maybe Sean Strickland right now has a completely different system, and his probably the way he approaches the 50-50 is different because of that fight with Sean Strickland. Maybe he made some patches, like I said. But like I said, I do feel like Israel Adesanya does beat Dricus du Plessis. Now, in terms of Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion, I think that's a 50-50 fight. I don't have a hunch. I'm not 100% certain on who's going to win that fight. Like I said, it's a 50-50 shot, right? Because we don't know how good actually Khamzat Chimaev is in the middleweight division, because this is going to be his official first, very, very first middleweight fight with an actual freaking middleweight. And is it a fast track to the title? Without a doubt. Without a doubt, it's a fast track to the title. Everybody's arguing me on whether or not this is a 100% Dana White privilege, and yes, it is 100% Dana White privilege. There's no fighter out there that has gotten a fast track to the title potentially like Khamzat Chimaev, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he is such a big draw and a big name for the UFC. But like I said, I feel like this fight is definitely a 50-50 shot. I don't know who wins this fight, in my opinion. I'm not confident in picking Robert Whittaker or Khamzat Chimaev. But I will say this: if Khamzat Chimaev gasses out the same way he gassed out against Kamaru Usman, I feel like Robert Whittaker, without a doubt, is gonna freaking run him over. Without a doubt, we've seen Robert Whittaker have multiple 5-round fights, and he performs very, very well. And he's a fighter that, in my opinion, does a really, really good job at managing his gas tank throughout the fight. He's really, really smart about that. And Robert Whittaker is not a dumb fighter. He's the real deal. And like I said, I'm not confident in picking either fighter for this fight, because we don't know. Maybe Khamzat Chimaev is a freaking a freaking gem, right? But from my opinion, I don't like Khamzat Chimaev's dispositions. I feel like sometimes he's a little bit too aggressive, and that's what causes him to be open a lot. Like we saw against Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns was hitting him with a lot of shots because Khamzat Chimaev is a fighter that likes to stand up square in front of his opponents, because he likes to fight very, very aggressively. Which brings me to a different point in this video, because if we see Israel Adesanya beat someone like Khamzat Chimaev, if that fight ever takes place, that would be one of the craziest outcomes to a fight we've ever seen, given the fact that Khamzat Chimaev is a fighter that has a whole lot of freaking hype behind his name. And contrary to that, imagine if we see Khamzat Chimaev absolutely beat someone like Israel Adesanya. That would be a crazy turn of events. Like, he would 100% be one of the few fighters that has had one of the craziest hype trains in UFC history and actually had the accolades to back everything that he set up. And obviously the future matchups would be definitely amazing. Imagine if we see Khamzat Chimaev versus Sean Strickland, or Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland too. Those are all fights that everybody wants to see, without a doubt. Now, I do believe that the UFC are definitely trying to gear us up towards having one of the biggest fights in middleweight history. That's just personally what I think, but let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, it's a pleasure talking to each and every single one of you guys. Peace out and have a good one.